Hey Virgo, Anna here from Virgo. What you think is happening and what is actually happening are not the same thing right now. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Like and subscribe. If the gap between those two things has been keeping you up at night, let's correct the lens. You have been reading refracted light, not the source, not the actual emission from the thing itself, the direct, unmediated, here is what this actually is signal that would give you accurate information about what you are looking at. Refracted light, light that has passed through a medium, through distance, through silence, through the specific distorting properties of your own history with this kind of situation, and arrived at your eye bent, slightly off from the original angle, still light, still real, still coming from the source, but not arriving at the angle it left at, which means the position you are inferring for the source based on what you are seeing is not the position the source actually occupies. You think they are further away than they are. You think they have moved. You think the distance between where they are and where you are has increased. You think the signal is weakening because interest is weakening, because something in them has shifted away from you. You built this conclusion from what you have been seeing, from the changed frequency of contact, from the quality of the silences, from the specific texture of interactions that seemed different from how they used to be, and the conclusion feels logical because it is built from real observations. The observations are real, the conclusion they are generating is not. The light is refracted. What you are reading as withdrawal is not withdrawal. What it actually is, depth. This requires unpacking because depth looks like distance from certain angles, and from the outside of it, from the position of someone watching another person go inward, it reads as retreat, as the withdrawal of surface warmth and accessibility in favor of something less available, as the dimming of the signal that was previously bright and frequent and easy to read. The temperature drops, the contact changes. The thing that was happening between you takes on a quality of having become somehow more. And here the language fails, which is part of why depth gets misread as distance. Because more serious and more significant and more invested do not have a common vocabulary that distinguishes them from more withdrawn. But the experience of them is completely different from the inside. From inside depth, the person is not retreating from you. They are moving toward you in the direction that matters inward, into the territory of what they actually feel, which requires a different quality of presence from the surface territory of what is easy to express. Surface feeling expresses itself easily and frequently because it does not require anything of the person beyond the expression. It is already at the level of the expressible, already formulated, already in a form that can be transmitted without the person having to change in order to transmit it. Deeper feeling is not like that. Deeper feeling requires translation, requires the person to go to where it lives, which is not at the surface, and find the form it needs, which is not already available, and carry it back through all the layers between the deep and the expressible, which takes time and produces exactly the visible behavior you have been misreading as disengagement. The quiet is the translation work. The stillness is the going deep. What they actually feel, do not skim this section. What they feel is large, larger than what the early stages of this connection suggested, larger than the warmth and the interest and the pulled toward that was present and visible and readable when the connection was operating at the surface level. That surface level was real. It was not the performance of something it was not, but it was also not the whole of it. The whole of it has been becoming clear to them in the period that you have been reading as cooling, in the period of the quiet, of the changed frequency, of the going inward. The whole of it is what the translation work has been producing. And the whole of it is more than they knew how to say when it was only beginning to be clear to them, more than the surface vocabulary can hold without misrepresenting it, more than they were ready to offer before they understood what they were offering. They understand now, or are close to understanding, close to the end of the translation work, close to the moment when what has been going on inside them in the period of the apparent withdrawal is ready to be brought back to the surface in the form that corresponds to what it actually is, not the manageable version, not the version that fits comfortably inside what already existed between you and does not require you or them to expand to contain it. The version that corresponds to what they actually found when they went deep, which is you, at depth, in the specific, irreducible, not a surface impression but a structural truth way that depth contact produces. The discovery of you not as an interesting person, not as an appealing option, not as the pleasant presence that the surface connection had been built around, but as something more like a necessity, a fact about what they need. A person without whom the specific quality of aliveness they feel in your presence is unavailable to them anywhere else. That is not a small discovery. That is not a thing that is discovered and then expressed immediately. That is a thing that requires the going inward, the quiet, the translation work, the full weight of the going deep before it can be brought back up in a form that does it justice. The misreading and where it came from, you did not invent this out of nothing. The reading of depth as distance has a history in you, a specific personal history of having felt this temperature before and having found on those previous occasions that it meant what it looked like it meant, that the cooling was the cooling and the withdrawal was the withdrawal and the signal weakening was actually the signal weakening. That history is real. It was the correct reading of previous situations. It produced accurate conclusions in the contexts in which it was formed. The problem is not the reading. The problem is the application of an accurate reading developed in one context to a different context where the variables are different. The person is different. The depth they are capable of is different. The specific combination of what they carry and what you draw out of them is different from the combinations that produce the previous cooling. And the reading developed in response to previous combinations is not calibrated for this one, is not calibrated for someone who goes quiet because they are processing something too significant to surface quickly, is not calibrated for someone whose withdrawal of surface availability signals not diminished interest, but interest so significant that the surface can no longer contain it without diminishing it. The reading needs updating. Not discarding the history that produced it was real, and the learning from it was real, and the protection it provides from certain kinds of situations is real and valuable, but updating, expanding to include the category it was not calibrated for, the category of depth as depth rather than depth as distance, of quiet as going inward rather than going away. What to do while the translation work finishes. Nothing that accelerates. Whew. This is the critical instruction, and it runs completely counter to the impulse that the misreading produces. Because the misreading produces the impulse to act, to close the perceived distance, to do something that confirms the connection is still there and prevents the apparent withdrawal from becoming actual withdrawal. The impulse is to reach, to check, to find the form of contact that will reassure you that the signal has not weakened, that the connection is not cooling, that the reading is wrong. The impulse is understandable. It is also the specific thing most likely to interrupt the translation work. Translation work requires the conditions of the going deep, which means it requires the space that depth requires, the room, the specific quality of not being interrupted that the translation work needs in order to produce the form that what they are feeling deserves. External pressure, even the gentle, well meaning, I just need to know if you're still interested. Pressure of someone trying to correct their own misreading changes the conditions, makes the translation harder, brings the person back to the surface before the translation is complete, produces, therefore, a surface level response to what is a depth level process, a response that will be genuine but incomplete, that will be the best available articulation of something that has not yet found its full form, and that will therefore confirm your misreading by not containing the depth that has not yet been translated. Wait, not indefinitely, not with the suspended, barely breathing patience of someone who has stopped living while they wait for something to resolve, but with the grounded, functional, your life is happening patience of someone who knows the difference between withdrawal and depth and is therefore not alarmed by the quiet, who can let the translation work complete itself because they understand what the translation work is, who can hold the space that the going deep requires because they have corrected the lens, and what they are now seeing in the space is not distance, but the particular private, slow motion process of a feeling finding its way to the surface in the form it deserves. The wait until, the title says, wait until you hear how they really feel. The wait until is the gap between the going deep and the coming back, between the translation work and the completed form, between the quiet and what the quiet was building toward, The gap has a size. It is not infinite. It is not arbitrary. It corresponds to the scale of what is being translated, which means the larger and more significant the feeling, the longer the translation work takes, which means the longer the wait until, but also in this matters, the more significant what arrives when the translation is complete. The size of the wait until is proportional to the size of what it is waiting for. Small feelings arrive quickly. They do not require extended translation work. They do not produce extended quiet. They surface naturally in the ordinary course of interaction without the going deep that produces the apparent distance you have been reading. The wait until that has been stretching, the quiet that has been making you read distance instead of depth, is the wait until of something that required going deep because it is deep. That required the translation work because the translation work was necessary. That has been taking the time it has been taking because the thing being translated deserves the time. You are waiting for something large. The large thing is almost ready. The corrected lens, hold it now, not tightly distorts too. Hold it with the specific, calibrated, good enough pressure of someone who understands what they are looking at and has stopped trying to force the image into a shape they previously recognized, who has allowed the image to be what it is. Someone going deep, someone doing the work of translation, someone whose apparent distance is not distance, but the specific geography of a person who is carrying something significant toward the surface and has not yet arrived. They are arriving. The signal you have been reading as weakening is not weakening. It is changing frequency from the high, frequent, easily transmissible frequency of surface communication to the slower, heavier, harder to transmit frequency of something being carried from depth. Depth transmits differently than surface. It moves more slowly. It requires more from both parties, more patience in the transmitting, more stillness in the receiving. But when it arrives as something that the surface frequency has never transmitted and cannot transmit. Something that does not diminish with the distance it traveled, but that arrives instead with the full, specific, undiminished weight of something real that made the entire journey. That is what is traveling toward you. Not the cooling, not the withdrawal, not the loss of interest that the misread lens was showing you. Something that went so deep it took this long to bring back, carried toward you, still carrying, almost here. Correct the lens and see what is actually coming.